Episode 55 of All the Horrible Things, brought to you by, hopefully you. We're looking for sponsors, people, so,
Yeah, brought to you by you, the listeners.
Exactly.
Fork it up.
We do gotta probably maybe put together means in which people can support beyond subscribe and like and spread the word, but we're not quite there yet. But we're going to talk about Evil Dead Rise today.
Yes, we're talking about the hit new film, which is doing pretty good in the box office.
It is doing really good for a budget of $19 million to be making what it's making. I mean, that weekend that it came out 2 weekends ago, you saw that before you saw Bo. You were more excited for Evil Dead Rise, it would appear.
It's the franchise. I mean, it was like my gateway to horror, the Evil Dead movies, and I think that's just, in my opinion, they can do no wrong. It's just like the best lore.
It does have good lore. I was thinking about that. Let's talk about other films really quick that even compare in the least, that have essentially what are possessed zombies, like zombies, but they have memories of who they were, and they can do these supernatural things that zombies can't. Right? It's not just because, let's think about the other possession movies that are even close to this. I mean, we're going to talk about how it alludes to The Shining, but for me, The Shining is probably the number one best kind of pseudo-possession film. Would you consider that a possession film?
Yeah. That's like a crazy mashup of like a haunted house meets possession movie, which is ironic because the original Evil Dead movie was kind of endorsed by Stephen King, and that's why it ended up doing well.
Taken off? Interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know that, huh?
But it's a good call. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's like a mashup of, you take like a George R. Romero Night of the Living Dead, and then you put The Exorcist into it.
Yes, I think that's a very good combo, a very good mashup.
Especially the first, Night of the Living Dead taking place like in a cabin in the woods. Yeah.
We're putting boards all over the windows, nailing the doors shut. Classic tropes, which this is really the first one to escape that. That being said, my introduction to this whole series was Army of Darkness. I remember going to my buddy's house in like high school, junior year. We'd be playing poker or whatever, and you'd always have Army of the Darkness on in the background. I didn't have any real sense that this was the third installment in the movie, in the series. But I enjoyed the visuals. But granted, Army of Darkness is very different than Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2.
Yes.
Despite having Ash, Bruce Campbell's character, lead.
Yeah. And it's a big reason was that it was kind of like the first studio version of the Evil Dead movies, where the studio had so much control. The movie went way over budget, and they shelved it. They shelved the movie for a long time. They changed the name. It was, I think there was an alternative title, and it kind of set it up for failure. And also, Sam Raimi, I think, was at a point where he was more interested in doing comedy, and it has a very Three Stooges feel to
slapstick is what I remember. And then is it stop motion that they use?
They use stop motion for like the Army of the Dead, very similar to what they used to do in the 60s and 70s with like Jason and the Argonauts and other Ray Harryhausen, the master of monsters.
Which in the right context, I think does work. I remember enjoying it in Army of Darkness in my teens. I haven't revisited it since then. That being said, I hadn't seen Evil Dead 1 or 2. And frankly, I've only seen half of 2. I watched half of 2 here just before this. And they also use that stop motion a little bit. It honestly looks like a Barbie doll that they're using for Ash's girlfriend from the first film. She's spinning
dancing
around
in the moonlight.
Didn't love that, if I'm honest with you. It kind of takes away from the scare factor. That being said, Evil Dead, the first 3, always do have like an undercurrent of humor. Maybe not the first one. The second one definitely had an undercurrent of humor.
The second one does, for sure.
The first one, I guess, took itself pretty seriously.
It did. And the thing about these movies, though, was that they were self-financed, the first two. You know, they had Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell and Rob Tapert, the producers. They found the money to make this from like dentists in Michigan, and they produced these films on their own. And Sam Raimi, the genius he is, you know, sort of invented a lot of stuff on this film and his style. So I understand when you say that, you know, it kind of takes you out of it at times with the stylization, but it's also, you know, 1980s practical effects.
Yes,
know.
it's unique. It certainly does date it, but given where the series is gone, I mean, you can accept it. Especially, we can't not note that Ash versus the Evil Dead was a show on Starz for 3 seasons that follows the same character from the first 2. And word on the street is there's going to be an animated version of that. That's a continuation. One note on the production side, as you brought it up, apparently part of the inspiration of this Necronomicon, Ex Mortis, essentially the Book of the Dead, is rooted in Raimi's having studied in college, I think it was University of Michigan that he went, Lovecraft in his 1924 story, The Hound, which I guess has something very similar, the Book of the Dead in it. And in terms of the distribution, I guess they also had this friend, Andy Granger, who owned a bunch of movie chains. And when they were making that first one, granted, it was initially just a short called Within the Woods in 1978, which didn't do great, but it did good enough for them to get the feature made. But this guy who opened the movie chains, he just said, just keep the blood rolling and people are going to love it. Just keep the blood rolling. And I guess in the first scene, the first film, there's the projector scene where the blood is coming down on the screen behind it, and that's kind of an homage to what he asks from them. Keep the blood rolling on the screen, and they actually literally do it.
Literally on the screen.
And then I guess
brilliant.
they took a train out to L.A. to get this made because none of their cars were likely to make it, as the story goes. And I guess they shacked up at Bruce Campbell's old girlfriend's place, this Andrea lady, who had a cat. And Sam Raimi is allergic to cats. There's going to be a cat in Evil Dead Rise we're going to talk about, too. Allergic to the cats, and apparently Raimi is such a deep sleeper that the cat fell asleep on his face, and he woke up completely, like, puffy-eyed, swole-eyed, blind. So they couldn't even, like, do what they were supposed to do when they first got there because he was all essentially Evil Deaded with his eyes bulging out, you know?
Dead-eyed.
That's pretty interesting. But
that's amazing.
I do think it's very unique. I think it's an IP that can last quite a while because we're talking about only 5 films, if you can include Army of Darkness, since 1978 is the first one?
No,
that's the first.
The short film, right. Yeah.
When was the first film?
1981. I think
1981. Then you got 1987 for Evil Dead 2. We're talking about the serious films. Then we got Evil Dead, kind of the reboot. I guess they call it a loose continuation of sorts in 2013, which I really liked. I liked Evil Dead Rise that came out 2 weeks ago. I would say exponentially better.
Yeah, same here. And I have, we can go into that now or we can go into it later, but I think the most interesting thing about Evil Dead Rise is that Lee Cronin took the whole premise and put it into an urban, like, apartment building instead of the cabin in the woods. It's kind of like what we just talked about with Scream, taking it out of its, you know, if you're going to keep something going like a franchise, you have to do something new. So making it an apartment horror is, you know, updated and more, I don't know, maybe relatable than a cabin.
Because I think about who's the audience, and I don't think it's kids that have access to the cabins in the woods because their mommy and daddy have that extra cabin. Granted, in the first 2 films, that is a piece of crap cabin.
Yeah.
That being said, in the second one, it's made clear that the parents of the woman who then goes looking for her parents in Evil Dead 2, I don't know if you remember it, they're the ones that show up and they have like a private plane or whatever. So she seems to be really affluent looking for her parents, who were the ones that kind of dug up the Necronomicon. And they died subsequently. Her mom is in the basement, pops up in 2. It's a really, really crappy shack for someone who you'd think was affluent. But back to your point, I completely agree. It needed to change. It needed to move on, and it needed to move on just from teenagers as well. And that's why Lee Cronin, I think, went with the family angle. That being said, he does pay homage to what Evil Dead is rooted in with our teaser.
I was going to say, having said that he updated it, he did a really amazing opening with a new cabin in the woods. It's even, it looks different. It's like, it's not even
swanky. It's really nice.
Yeah.
You got that
like
long
an Airbnb
dock. You got this douchey guy with a drone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, here's something really cool about that opening shot is that's Sam Raimi's flying through the woods. He invented that's what the evil does in these movies. It flies through the woods. And a really fun thing for Lee Cronin to do was start off with that similar shot, and then it turns into the drone. It's like, I'm not going to steal it, but I am going to reimagine it.
Call back to it. But you're absolutely right. That is one of my favorite parts about these Deadite spirits is the way they kind of Michael Myers, but like top speed through the trees, Right. It's really fun to see the spirit. And speaking of which, doing a little digging on what these Kandarian demons initially looked at, because apparently the Kandar Castle Kandar is from like 15th century England is where this originated. And what they initially supposedly looked like when they were summoned is this non-defined physical shape that appeared like a living cloud, which rolls across the land. I guess in one alternate reality, this first form is... Oh, I got it cut off here. This first form is seen as a demonic skull surrounded by a hazy blue mist, giving it a more ghostly appearance. But I found that interesting given the first film, and I don't know if you remember, they keep cutting to this shot of the cabin outside with the moon, and then the same like misty cloud, the same movement. They use the same shot a couple times, sort of thing. A little annoying for me, but I liked that knowing that that's essentially what it was supposed to, look like manifested.
Gotcha.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Deadites themselves, what they're capable of, before we dig into the characters and the plot of Evil Dead Rise. Because I will say, when I was watching it, I was a little confused about how people got possessed at first, because obviously we have the very clear one where there's the incantation. You use the Book of the Dead, and you say stuff that you're not supposed to say, and you get blood on the book. That's pretty standard throughout, right?
Correct.
And then usually there's that spirit that comes and takes over, usually, not a final girl. There's no final girls in the Dead series, which I do like.
No,
with the exception of the 2013 one. And I guess in this one, there's two-ish.
Yeah.
But they could be tracked down very easy, given that you can't really kill these things. You can stop them by dismembering their flesh, but you can't really kill them. But look in here, if you don't mind me running through the ways in which, according to the fandom,
please do,
can be possessed, is you got the wounded target. So we've seen this one a lot of times, just like they get infected by having some sort of wound. I don't know if you remember the first one, but the girl who's stabbed with the pencil in the foot, and then it's going to happen. The touch of evil is what they call probably the most graphic and memorable one. The touch of evil is essentially when the trees take control of you and then, violate you in some ways, or in this case, we have the elevator wires doing this to our main girl. Is it Ellie? Is that her name? Ellie and Beth. Sisters Ellie and Beth are the leads of this new one. You got a bite and a scratch. You got contaminated blood injections. You got skin contact can do it. Apparently, there's an orb. I don't remember seeing an orb in anything, but...
I don't think so.
Is that Ash versus the Dead? Maybe that's in. A Necronomicon spell, of course, is what we know. And then the blood of the Necronomicon. So apparently the book itself bleeds. But I guess one of my hang-ups is that it's not consistent. And you see people get barfed on with blood, but they don't turn, sort of thing. That's the only that I wish there was a little more consistency. Granted, I guess they use 6,500 gallons of fake blood in this new one.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was interesting that there was that many ways in which one could get infected, but then it not be
Sure.
a through line. And before I ditch this wiki page and we can get to more of our criticism, the powers, let's just run through the powers that a Deadite has, because these are not Deadheads. I know there's the Grateful Dead fans we have out there. We're not talking about you. We're talking about Deadites here. They got the enhanced strength. They can levitate. They have superhuman durability. They can shapeshift. And by this, it really just means they have the capacity to turn into their old form where they look normal and human again. They have super speed, body jumping, an ability rarely seen, and particularly unruly Deadite spirit can jump from one host to another, which I don't think I've seen in any of the ones we've watched.
I don't know if they've used it. They may have used it on the show.
Okay. All right. And then the one that we do see in this is the group merging power a la The Thing, which is freaking amazing.
Yeah, that was amazing.
But I digress on the fandom. I think that sets people up for what we're talking about here. If you haven't gotten into the series yet, it's very cool in that it has its own world that is a lot of fun. Before we move on, there is talk about another one coming and bringing back Ash, played by Bruce Campbell, who's been in them.
Yes.
Where do you stand on that? Do we need another movie with him?
If they do another movie, I would bet money it's because they did the same thing with the Ash versus the Evil Dead. That he won't be the center focus. He will be part of an ensemble.
Got it.
And I think that would be a fun way of tying the original, original films to what they're doing now. I would bet money they'd kill him off finally.
Yeah.
But the thing that
he's an executive producer. He's still making money off these anyways.
Oh yeah. And he's a major supporter of the franchise. He's the one who shows up at the Comic-Cons and horror cons. So Bruce, for years, has basically, I don't want to say done what Sam Raimi has allowed him to do, but we know that Bruce wouldn't do another Evil Dead and reprise the role of Ash unless Sam Raimi was involved. So I think that would be the catch, is that Sam might come back to direct something. And a few weeks ago, Bruce Campbell tweeted out he's a very mysterious tweet from or text that he had gotten from Sam Raimi that said, "Get your fat ass to the gym," which Sam kind of took as oh, you want me to get back into shape for this. So
that's exciting. I definitely like the idea of him being a supplemental, but you got to put a name in there or something, because as much as I love him, I mentioned it to Mara. She never heard of him. You know what I mean? He's not somebody that's bringing people into the audience unless you are a Deadite yourself, a
horror fan will go see anything Bruce Campbell's in. Yes,
he's great in the smaller projects that he does outside of horror too. He's always entertaining to watch.
And
let's
Marvel?
talk really quick about his character, if you don't mind. In the through line of the first two, because I noticed a big change from Evil Dead 1 to Evil Dead 2 just in his ability to act. He got much better.
Yes.
Where do you stand on that front?
I think that's a combination of him, getting better over time, and I think it's probably a huge contribution of Sam Raimi becoming a better director.
That's probably true.
And knowing how to direct Bruce and what he's capable of. I heard, in interviews from Bruce Campbell that Sam Raimi kind of beats the shit out of Bruce Campbell on set because he knows his limits and what he's capable of. And I think that's what gets his performance to that level.
Yeah, because in 2, I feel like he does go above and beyond. That being said, there are still some of these weird scenes in these two movies, the first two, that kind of inexplicable to me. Where he just kind of stands frozen in the first one while his girlfriend's coming at him, and the guy that he's with, who is he's cringy. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
the other male lead in that one, it's a struggle to listen to his deliveries and such, but he just kind of stands there. It doesn't do anything. I'm excited how much he's evolved with the series. That's all I'm trying to get at here, because I do adore him. I just think maybe the first one could use a new cut or something to make it really amazing. But
I bet you they feel the same way, but I bet you it's also a really good benchmark to show where they started and where they're at now. Because if you haven't seen the TV series Ash versus the Evil Dead, it shows like as a team how they've grown and
Oh, good.
what they can pull.
I've seen a little bit of the first season. I really liked it. It's just one of those things. It's on Stars. It's hard to get
Sure,
get a
it's
hold
hard
of too.
Yeah, Netflix was streaming it for a while and then pulled it, and
And that being said, I don't like to trash talk people's acting, but this Richard DeManicore from Evil Dead 1, there's a reason he doesn't have a link here on Wikipedia like the rest of the people in that movie.
Yeah, he was. This was
Sorry,
this is like
Rich.
this is
fan.
like the exact you know, I don't want to trash indie filmmaking because I love indie filmmaking, but you know, you work with what you've got, and I bet you they in Michigan didn't have access, you know, to Hollywood actors, and they were developing.
And I will say, in terms of his character, is at least his character stood up and actually fought the Deadites the demons as they were coming at him. Whereas Bruce in that first one, he's just standing there, froze. He's not too impressive in that first one. And there's multiple times where he falls for his girlfriend, turning back to her old self. Oh no, I can't kill you now. And she comes after him, and then he's good again. I don't know. Yes, I'm glad both the acting and the characters evolved of Ash. It was weird because in the first one he's called Ashley, not Ash.
Yeah, Ashley. Yeah.
Which is strange. I've never met Dude Ashley.
Oh yeah, sure.
You have? Okay.
Sure. No, I just know that it's one of those those
but
ambiguous
you've never
names
met one.
No, I've never met one. I think it's a generational thing. I think at one point,
okay. That's fair. Interesting. Let's get back on track here. And let's talk Evil Dead Rise with our director Lee Cronin, who I loved from The Hole in the Ground. I think we talked about that last year a little bit.
We did.
Essentially,
I think we did. Irish horror filmmaker. I think that's when we did Irish horror.
Oh, interesting. But that one, if you guys don't remember, is about this kid who essentially keeps his family in the ground in the backyard while he kind of just has the run of the house and is a little psycho, right? Is that the right one, or am I thinking of something different?
No, I think you're thinking of a different one. The Hole in the Ground is about the mother whose son goes missing. It's a changeling
the doppelganger
story.
One.
Yes.
Okay, the changeling one. Okay.
I know. I think the one you're talking about, I actually didn't get to watch. I know the one you're talking about. I can't think of the title.
That's immediately where my head went with The Hole in the Ground.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, my bad then. I did also like that changeling movie as well.
Yeah.
And he's Irish. So can't go wrong there.
and it kind of shows you that he is also a great director of young talent, because this Evil Dead Rise focuses on a family, and the youngest actor, I would say, is probably like 9 or
so character Cassie.
Cassie is got to be like 9, 10 years old, or maybe even younger. I don't know, but I thought she was great on camera.
She was great. That's actually something I asked while we were watching. I was like, how much do you think they tell this kid about what's going on in this story and what she's actually dealing with? Because Cassie's one of the ones that makes it through the entirety of the film, sees all the horrors, ultimately ends up seeing her mom and her 2 siblings conjoin into an amorphous blob of monster called a marauder, I guess. What do you think? Like, where do you stand ethically in terms of parents that would allow their kid to be doused in blood at the age of 6 or 7, whatever she is?
Well, I think, maybe in the 70s and 80s, I don't think the kids had a say in it, and the parents just, allowed it to happen for the money. I'd say, they've come a long way about parents on sets. I bet Cassie's parents were right there, and I'd say that they probably made it fun. A lot of these horror movies seem like they're making comedies when they're doing this stuff on set.
That's a point. That is a point.
I think this. Yeah, I think it's more of an upbeat set. I mean, I'm sure there's ways of scaring a child on set, but I don't know if that's ethical. Like, if you were to not, like you asked, like, how much do you inform the child? I mean, you could get a genuine, realistic scare out of a child if you didn't explain to them what's happening, but you might do some long-term damage as well.
Yeah. So I had nightmares the night I saw it, as did Mara. We both had nightmares that night.
Really?
It was that impacting.
Wow.
I know you mentioned you enjoyed it, but your lady she didn't think it was scary. She enjoyed it, but she just didn't find it scary?
Well, okay. So Nora is somebody who has come a long way as far as like horror movies. When we first started dating, she was like, "Nope, can't watch them." Now she watches, anything that I put on, and a big part of horror. I mean, I think people assume they're gonna get scared, but when you actually sit through it, I mean, it could evoke some jump scares in you, but I didn't think this movie. Maybe I'm like just desensitized to it, but I don't know. It's a really tricky thing. Everyone reacts to them differently.
Yeah, that's fair. For me, the ones that really impact me, that I find more scary, are the ones not rooted in like the supernatural, like we talked about before. Speak No Evil, which is now getting a remake with James McAvoy,
Right.
where everything that happens in there is so horrific, but it could actually happen, sort of thing.
Yes.
And literally, when the bad guys are asked, "Why are you doing this?" It's like, because we could, a la like The Strangers, because you were home. These sort of just really ominous existential horrors are what would get to me. But let's talk the deeper meaning on this one then, because if you remember in 2013, they used the premise of a girl going through withdrawals. I'm assuming it was heroin withdrawals, and she's the one that gets taken over. Initially, she's the first one that gets put in the cellar, a la the first one, because the 2013 one has a lot in common with the OG.
It does. It does. A group of friends at a cabin. It's just They bring the star in the 2013 version to the cabin to try to detox. Try to go. I even think she says going cold turkey.
Right.
And I've always thought it would be interesting if it was more of like a surprise, like intervention.
Surprise intervention would have been better. Yeah.
Yeah, but then I'm going through my head. I'm like, but does that make it? There's got to be some things like the fact that she was willing to go there almost makes it worse. I don't know, but
I think if it was a surprise, like you said, I might have bought them thinking her going crazy was just her going through the withdrawals when she was really starting to express the demonism or whatever. That would have been a little more buyable, because there's moments in that 2013 one where she's just obviously a slave to Satan or whatever, to Kandar.
Right.
And they're like, it's really that bad, huh? Those withdrawals really suck. I struggle a little with that. But this one, I think, is more on the money in terms of what I think is going on with the deeper meaning. And you mentioned Cronin does well with the family dynamic. And in his first one, The Hole, it's essentially the mother being weary, scared of her child. And this one, we have the inverse, where you have the children, and then, of course, the sister, who no longer can trust their mother figure, the protective figure. It's a sweet inverse in terms of what he's done. But I really think, like, at the root of it, it's the horrors of being a single mother, and like what you think your children might end up because you are not following this prescribed nuclear family that your kids are going to get judged for not having,
Yeah. And the whole time this is happening, our star, the aunt, finds out she's pregnant. So she has to now take on this motherly role as well and figure out, could I be a mother? Because her character seemed very independent, was like in the music industry, touring, and it's the exact opposite lifestyle. But we find out, that she's willing to basically put her life on the line for the people she loves. It's
at the end, I think she went, because she pretty much goes to visit her sister, who is the single mother of 3 kids, right? All now in their teens, to kind of decide, am I going to have this kid or not? Sort of thing. I think she goes there to kind of gauge, can I do this? Should I do this? How did her kids kind of turn out? I think it's just about her as it is about the mom, dealing with her own issues as a single mother and the struggles that come with that. You're absolutely right. It's almost timely given the Roe v. Wade stuff that's happening culturally, to or to not, depending on your personal circumstances.
Sure.
And you're right. There's a fun moment when she does find out that she's pregnant. She looks at the graffiti on the bathroom wall, and it's this like demonic face with like eyes gooing out. It's beautiful foreshadowing. There's a lot of foreshadowing through this. So yeah, let's dabble back then at the beginning of this film, where
let's.
Finding the book is always a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
And in this one, they do something different. Because they're in California in this condemned high-rise, they're in the parking garage down at the basement after getting food, going out for pizza or whatever, and the earthquake kind of breaks up this parking garage enough for them to then find like a tome, and then the tome itself is, or the tomb, what would you call those? The
it's
sarcophagus is cracked a little bit, where they then scoop out the book, which is covered in locust.
Yeah. I mean, I thought this was a really fun new take on it. I think they even mentioned the fact on the record that there's a couple different versions of this book. Am I wrong there? Didn't they mention that there are multiple
there would
copies?
have to be if this is if it's canon. You know what I mean? Because it would not make any sense.
As far as a timeline goes, that this book was put into the ground here by these priests, or in this tomb, like you're saying. It seemed like it was in like the 40s or 50s, or whenever, like people were recording to vinyl as like dictating notes. I'm not just talking about making records. I'm talking about it as a means of actually keeping track of notes. It would be really cool to know that this is just one of the books, and maybe there are 2, 3 total, and like that's where the other stories, revolve around those. I thought, when it was first happening, I was like, I don't necessarily love where this is going with the priests. It was like maybe it was a little too much on the nose, and I was pleasantly surprised with how they sort of just put that into, or Lee did, as far as the storytelling goes.
Right, because it didn't really come up that much again at all, right?
Right.
Did it? No. I did like that they then used, like you said, the turntables, which does go back to the first ones, which use those
DJ,
as well.
Yeah, the DJ turntables.
But this one had to go backwards, which was fun.
That was kind of fun. And I wanted to talk really quick about just a little bit more about the opening sequence, though, at the cabin. Because I really liked that I didn't know how these stories were going to connect, and that it's not like they said 2 days earlier or 1 day earlier.
Right.
And I, that may have been one of the scariest moments, was the scalp being ripped off.
The scalping was great.
Oh my God.
I didn't love the drone self-maiming, because as far as I can remember, that's the only time we've seen a possessed person.
A deadite trying to
maim themselves? Without purpose, sort of thing?
Unless there was a moment of quick clarity there where the person was trying to fight back and trying to end themselves.
That's a question I want to ask you. Is that even a thing?
Back?
Once you're taken over, can you pop up, or is that just the demon playing with you, making it seem like in the moments where the mom's in the kitchen with the scramby eggs, and she's saying something like, "Don't let them get my babies." Is she actually popping up for a second, or is that just heightening the horror? As they like to do. They like to create the fear and the chaos.
I think Lee was introducing that. I think it will add into a growth into this series, instead of the contained versions that I don't think Sam and Bruce and Rob, when they were making these movies in the 80s, thought that this was going to be a franchise over time. And I think Lee recognizes the fact that there has to be some more humanity into these characters if you want to try to continue and just kind of, I don't know, develop new spins on these characters.
And potentially give them any hope, right? Because in the first one, when we do see them turn back, Evil Dead 2, you see her mom come back and say, you were born on this date. Or when Ash's girlfriend comes back and, Ash, what's happening to me? You know. But in this one, you don't know. I feel like you don't know if she is bleeding through a little bit, and that she's fighting this thing in her mind.
Right.
I appreciate that. Then it's ambiguous right now. We don't know for sure, but there's the potential.
The only other thing I could almost equate it to is like that moment where someone's going down in quicksand, and it's like their last few words before they actually get completely smothered. And it's like, this is the last bit of their mother coming out before she's completely taken over. But I will say, my only complaint about the movie was that sometimes it was a little too dark. Watching it in the theater,
literally, like the lighting.
The
you couldn't
lighting,
see what was going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes in the apartment, I was like, I think I'm focusing too hard on this light.
I could see that being something that would be annoying.
Maybe it was our projector. Maybe it was like our projector.
Yeah, because I didn't really notice that too much. Like I was pretty absorbed into it to the point where, like, when it did get dark, I was, I felt like it was purposeful, I guess, when there were those moments. But that's probably a fair assessment. It could have lit up, especially because this is another question I want to ask you about the Deadites. They can't exist in the light. They just temporarily go away and then come back, because at the end of Evil Dead 1, right? They make it seem like Bruce Campbell has been possessed, and then essentially Evil Dead 2 restarts with him being, shot back through the forest, and he wakes up in a puddle and then it's light, and he had turned, but when the light comes up, he was back to normal.
No, I don't think that's
They can live in the light.
True. Yeah, because I'm thinking of scenes in Army of Darkness, and I'm thinking of scenes in Ash versus the Evil Dead that take place during the day. I just think that they kind of lean into the horror where it mostly takes place at night, but I don't think that's a rule, like a vampire type of a thing.
Fair. One other thing I want to mention about that opening sequence, I didn't love, that I loved and I didn't love, okay? Two things. Didn't love just the severed head popping up out of the water. Felt like that was lazy, It was fine. It was just fine. Let's put it that way. After how amazing the scalping was, I just thought that was fine. But I did love the literary allusion at the top, because we have the girl who gets scalped reading Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte, who's Gothic, Gothic writer, and she's also known for holding up, not leaving her home, and then she dies of tuberculosis, which is somewhere you coughing up blood,
right?
So I felt like that was a nice little literary gem for the likes of my brain.
That's good, and I'm sure only so many people actually can catch those smaller details.
And it was cool that when she was possessed, she was reciting what she was reading.
Yes.
That was a new thing that they could see through your sight.
Yeah, that's something borrowed from the actual possession genre. Now, when someone is possessed in an Exorcist style movie, they have information that they didn't know originally. So that's when you've got someone speaking a different language that they didn't know. They're speaking Bible verses or whatever. They're quoting Sanskrit that doesn't exist anymore. This is the equivalent. They're reading parts of a book that they've memorized that they probably haven't even gotten to yet.
Right. Yeah, I dug that.
Yeah, I liked that a lot too.
For the most part, I love the teaser. What did you think about the title screen, ultimately, where you have the character coming out a lot like a holy figure, like a Jesus sort of rising from the water? Then you get your title, Evil Dead Rise, as appropriately she's rising.
Was incredibly powerful and impactful. I just thought...
I liked that shot. That was a good shot.
Yeah,
it was dark.
That was great. The sound was like kind of blew you back. And it was basically like an acknowledgement. The movie hasn't even really started yet.
Right.
What you just saw was just a fun little appetizer. Here's the main course. That's what I got from it.
It was a hell of an attention getter.
Yeah. Something that I really loved about this was the fact that you're in an apartment complex. You have the ability to have some other neighbors. And I really liked the older man who, you could tell that you could tell that there's a close, tight-knit community here. There's not a lot of them left in this building. It looks like, I think they said it's being condemned and
it's
knocked down soon.
And
but
apparently the exit stairwell was not functional or locked up.
Certainly parts of it were destroyed during the quake.
That's right. Okay, yeah.
But I think also, some of this building was inhabitable, and that's why it has to come down. I liked, though, that Mr. Fonda, I think Gabriel was the other neighbor.
Yeah.
They knew things about the sisters. So
right. And they had a crush on
Ellie's
Bridget, or one of them did.
Yeah. Ellie's telling, like, Mr. Fonda's like, oh yeah, you're the sister who, yeah, like, I liked those small little details there without, just dumping exposition out of these side characters.
They were fleshed out enough to actually care when they were defleshed,
Right. And they were bodies to then form into a larger body, which
is great.
Something funny, though, I thought was how ironic Ellie was when she says, when she's mad at her kids for taking the elevator after an earthquake, and then she goes and does the laundry.
I know.
And then that's when she starts becoming possessed, and the cables tie her up. And I did like that, though. I did like the elevator.
I thought it was cool.
Evil Dead Rise, we're going up, and then you're stuck here on this floor. There was a lot of fun things about it being an apartment building instead of a cabin in the woods.
What do you think about, though, because they then would cut to the book in drawings in the book that were identical to what was happening then. Is that something they've done before? I felt like before it was more like a broader connection and not literal frames of what we just saw sketched out.
Yeah, and I hear you. I don't think that they've done that almost like chronological, like this is happening in a specific order. But I think that was another fun thing that Lee Cronin got to
the drawings were
add
cool
to it.
So
they were super cool. Like, let's show more of that. And I think it was sort of like just building. It sort of like builds through a story better.
Yeah. No, I mean, I wasn't bothered by it. I'm just
no. But
maybe
you're right.
It had to be a different book, because we're seeing new pictures that.
Well, the other Necronomicon from the other series doesn't have the teeth that will.
That's true. I like that because that pricked her finger, and that's what opened it up with the blood getting on the skin-bound book.
Maybe this is a more powerful version. Maybe this has got other, like, it's more well protected. It almost felt like the book itself was more alive in this version and then in the other films.
That is interesting because when I was doing a little research on just the Book of the Dead has popped up in so many different things, and in some, including like the Marvel universe, the Book of the Dead is sentient and actually can speak back to you, sort of thing. So,
right.
Maybe they're evolving just the nature of the Necronomicon itself, which I'm okay with. Especially because that's what I forgot to mention. It had been a span of 40 years since they've made the 4, but now I'm hearing that they want to churn one out every 2 to 3 years. Did I mention that already?
No, you didn't mention that part. I think it's ambitious, and I sometimes think it's exciting as a fan of the IP, but it's also kind of worrisome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But having said that, I mean, I think if you told me tomorrow that they weren't going to make any more films ever, I'm still really happy with the movies that they have made. I
agree. Yeah, I'm keeping an open mind. I mean, they literally churned out Scream 6 in a year, and I enjoyed it. So, you never know. It's possible. Granted, Scream doesn't have the same sort of effects I feel like this one does, which I think take more time.
Yeah.
Let's do a little more hashing out of some of our favorite scenes, some of the horror that we loved in it.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that bathtub scene was really, really iconic.
Yes, which was preceded by a fun moment, too, on the bed, where she seems dead, and then her eyes open, which happens in the first one, too. But then the fly lands on her eyeball. You gotta love that. Oh, that's creepy as hell.
Yeah,
I'm sure we've seen it before, but it gets me every time, because flies are just nasty.
Eyeballs,
and, everything they land on, they barf on, so...
But yeah, I think that the jumping up out of the bathtub is going to be in montage horror scenes forever.
Yeah,
I think it also was reminiscent of the bathtub in The Shining.
Yes,
and,
totally.
And I really like this. Is like the first time, like with Mommies with the Maggots.
Yes, Mommies with the Maggots. Now,
really like the voice that they gave her too. I thought it was creepy. It was almost a new spin on the Deadites, because I think this was more of just a small modular like change to the voice, when I think in other versions that they may just straight up use different voices on the actors. I'm not certain of that. But that was one of my favorite scenes, was just that jump.
That was really
then-
effective, especially because
Yeah.
we had the more playful scene at the tub prior to that, before she'd been possessed,
Yeah.
with the aunt and Cassie, and she pretends like she's getting sucked up. You know, your classic trope. I don't know if you noticed, though, there's a scene where she puts her hand into the water, where they're underneath the water, and it's like a reverse shot of Freddy when his fingers go up. That
Or
was the
Nightmare
other
on Elm
way.
Street.
I just felt like that might have been a little homage too, possibly, because
Sure,
it was just the
sure.
inverse of it, you know?
Now that you mentioned that moment, though, it's really funny because that's something that, like, as a parent wouldn't necessarily think to do, because you want your kids to take baths. You don't want them to
Exactly.
be scared. And this is the aunt version and not
Right.
the mom version. But then later you've got the little girl saying you're going to be a good mommy because you know how to lie to kids.
Yes,
It's
that
a
was
really
good moment.
funny connection between those two.
Between Cassie and Beth.
Our
I
final
totally agree. Well, just to speak
girls.
to what you were talking about earlier with Allie's character, played by Alyssa Sutherland, I thought she was really effective. I feel like she has like a horror face in itself. I mean, she's a
Yeah.
beautiful woman. It's just that she has those like sharp angles that, you know, come off a little sinister without the
Yep.
makeup, you know? So I
Yep.
thought she was perfectly cast.
Yeah, she was also on a show I watched called Vikings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I thought she did a really great job,
Huh.
just overall, and I think she will be sort of like you'll see her in more horror movies,
Right.
but I will say that this performance, I think, is sort of like
Yeah.
iconic.
It was great. I
Yeah.
liked her better than the one in 2013. I thought she was more effectively scary. Granted, that one gets
Yeah.
trapped in the cellar for most of the movie, but okay. So you love the bath scene. Then we move on to Mommy's with the Magus now. Oh yeah. Okay. So she comes out of the bathroom and then she starts attacking people. Right. You got the poor aunt who gets stabbed through the hand. That was nice and gory. That's the moment where it's like, why isn't she turning? Why hasn't she turned via this moment?
Right.
Sort of thing.
Right.
Because right after that, you have her dealing with the tattoo gun. She stabs herself, and then she's about to stab Bridget, her middle daughter, in the eye. But then, you know, gets
With
tousled
the tattoo gun, right? With
the tattoo gun. So
Ooh.
it's then blood on her, and then she gets her in the cheek ultimately. And as we know, Bridget does turn soon after that. And I wanted to talk about Bridget's turning. What did you think about the vomiting of the locusts, which, you know, we saw in the book initially?
Yeah.
I love it. It seemed like she was just getting hollowed out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, that was incredibly cool. Yeah, it seems that kind of everybody changes at a different rate, you know.
Yeah. That's the point. And her reveal, though, okay, so Bridget changes,
Go ahead.
and then later when Beth enters the kitchen, she's squatting on the counter,
The counter, yeah.
eating glass. That was fun.
pretty-
That was new. Hadn't seen that before. Because
Yeah.
you'd see the glass actually go down her throat
Oh,
and like
yep.
pierce through the skin. That was
Yep.
sufficiently horrific for me, which leads into, I think, the scene that's the most notorious. The only thing that I'd heard about the movie prior is the cheese grater.
Yeah.
When his
Yeah.
aunt is trying to escape, she holds her down and cheese grates her leg, which I think was another callback to Evil Dead 1, because I don't know if you remember, but Ash's right leg gets just torn into, very similar to what it looks like with the cheese grater
Sure.
from the Cheryl who's trapped in the basement. So, I don't know. I think he definitely
Yeah.
had studied the earlier movies enough to kind of like put his own
Oh.
take on stuff that had actually occurred prior.
Agreed.
Including the
What-
eye pop. I didn't like the eye pop. We mentioned all of the neighbors in the hall who get
Yeah.
ultimately slaughtered by her. And at one point, an eye pops out of somebody and into somebody else's mouth. I hated that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But that was in Evil Dead 2 too, which makes
I
me
know.
forgive it a little bit. But it's just
Yeah,
silly.
it-
That's the moment that Mara was like the most grossed out. And to me, it was like, okay, lost me a little bit here. You know?
Well, there you go, though. There you go. It's
To each
going
their
to hit
own.
everybody a little bit differently. I also thought it was a little too comical for
Yeah.
the tone he was going with.
Right.
But yeah, it is forgivable if it's like, well, that's just
It's a
another
callback.
connection. It happens in this world. It
Yes, it
happens
does.
in I think it happens in Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell as
Oh
well.
my God.
When
Why?
she's fighting, or the old woman's teeth fall. Oh God, there's so many. body horror jokes in Sam Raimi's world.
Yeah, I mean, it's
What did
fun. It's just there was nothing else like that, so it just stood out to
Yeah.
me. Is all.
What did you think about? This is a two-parter.
Yeah.
The other Shining, because there's so many references here. The obvious one, the blood in the elevator,
Right.
and I thought for sure if you're completely covered in this blood that you would change.
That's another moment where I was like, how,
Yeah.
why? You're throwing me off here. It's possible that the Deadites love the fear and they decide when you get turned, because they want it to
could be.
Last
It's a
sort
game.
of thing.
It's a game.
Yeah, that is because if there's nobody there to mess around with, then, what's the point?
There's no fun tormenting the living.
But I did like seeing the elevator from within fill up, because
Yeah.
you see it in The Shining just open, and you get a similar shot with the bodies coming out too. But I thought that was a really claustrophobic moment, especially when you have the Marauder on top of it with, 6 arms reaching from the hole in the elevator, the exit, and, that's what ultimately made it crash down because of all the extra weight. I liked it, but you're right. The third act is nonstop. There's no dialogue really. It's just nonstop horror.
That's a
mayhem.
great point. That's a great point about the dialogue. There's just more Evil Dead references. The chainsaw.
Yes, gotta have a chainsaw.
I loved the justification of the body having that machine there in which the bodies go into,
Which was foreshadowed in the earthquake at the beginning. When the earth starts shaking, you see the wood chipper shaking too, very noticeably.
Yeah. I was gonna say the shotgun, the fact that she grabs the shotgun and the chainsaw are just, those are Ash. You're the new Ash Williams here. Ashy,
and she was
slashy.
good. I liked Beth too. I thought she was essentially our final girl.
Yeah.
And it was a pregnant final girl, which I feel like it's happened before, but not off the tip of my tongue can I think of one.
Yeah, I'm
pregnant
sure
final girl.
Yeah.
But, earlier moment I just want to mention was I really liked when the mom tricked Cassie into thinking that she was still her mom, because if anybody's going to get tricked, it's going to be the kid. So in those moments, it kind of worked, because then later she tries to trick her again and Cassie's learned her lesson. The scissors through her head, that's another thing. I don't get how sometimes they can be decapacitated and then they come back 10 minutes later sort of thing.
Sure.
It's like they're short-circuited for a minute.
It's dismemberment. It's like the only.
Yeah.
In fact, let's go to the opening scene to the 2013 Evil Dead, in which we have a girl who's tied up, and there are these locals, and then there is a father.
Right.
And we find out the daughter is a Deadite.
Yes.
And he has to not only burn her body, but then remove her head, and he blows it off with a shotgun. And it's just like, that's what locals know. That's what you do. It's like, I guess, kind of like the equivalent of a zombie. You have to remove their head or stab them in the brain.
Get them in the brain.
Although,
you got to do what you got to do.
In this world, you have to.
Teaser of 2013 was really effective, I thought, too, because it makes it seem like she gets kidnapped, essentially. They put the bag over her head when she's in the woods. You really feel like you're dealing with bad guys, and then it turns out to be
the father.
It was a nice switch. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. And then we have a really great wrap up on just talking about the story in general here, to bring it back to the opening sequence. The fact that it's like ending and starting, it was really fun. Like, it wasn't just like the day before. Like, this girl was in this building the entire time. She's talking to somebody on the phone, and then she ends up in the parking garage, and like, here we go,
walking through this like pool of blood, not knowing it because she's gabbing on the phone.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was really well structured, I guess you could say. I really liked the way that the whole thing moved. I wasn't bored ever. I think that's part of what makes Evil Dead's unique. The director actually, when asked about that, says, he's like, so what is the Dead like series essence? And he says, a whirlwind of energy where anything can happen. And I think that's really an effective way to describe it. So
I hope that they continue to work with Lee, because I think he just gets it. he understands the assignment. I think he brought some really fun new things to the franchise. And
well, especially because the guy who directed the 2013 one, Mr. Alvarez, is now moving on to the Alien TV series.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people are worried about it because it's just a bunch of hot young things.
Yeah, I know they just announced that.
We don't have our beloved, character actors like in the best incarnations of Aliens. So
Right.
We'll see. He was great in the first one was good. 2013 was good. I have hope. I'm optimistic. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. Let's hope Lee sticks with this for a little longer here.
I'm excited to see what they want to do next, and if they will in fact bring Bruce into this kind of new world, or if it will be a separate, like, just another additional, like, I don't know what you would do with Ash though. Again, so I'm just curious to see.
Yeah, I'm excited, but unless you got anything more,
go see this movie. Just go see it, and then also like and subscribe to us and leave a comment on our Spotify and or Apple Podcasts.
And in order to do that, one must stay alive.